Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. We're so glad that you have joined us today to be here with us to hear from a very good friend of ours, Russ Hancock. He is a husband and a father currently serving as the president and CEO of the joint venture Silicon Valley, a position he has held since 2003. In this role, Dr. Hancock is best described as a civic leader, community gatherer, institution builder, social entrepreneur, and an outspoken advocate for racialism. So with that, I would like to welcome Russ, and so that he can give us some insights about how regionally and how locally we all live together. So over to you, Russ.
Thank you, Anjali. This is wonderful. I was honored that you would invite me to spend time with you today, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. Now, Anjali, I'm supposed to just launch in at this point. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, I will do that. My plan is just to talk about the state of things, to talk about where we are. I'll just cover a bunch of broad points, and then I'll look forward to dialogue and discussion. I hope there's lots of comments. By talking about how we're doing in the fight against the virus. You know, when this all began, we were told that about 50% of our population would contract the virus and that 4% of those people would die. And that meant that we were bracing for about 125,000 deaths, COVID-related deaths in the Bay Area. That did not happen. So let's just stipulate that right away. Why? Well, there was strident leadership by our counties and by our cities and by our health officials. And in fact, the Bay Area's counties have been probably the most strident in the entire nation. We were able to flatten the curve as a result. I should also point out that the tech sector was way ahead of the curve on this. They shut down before any of the orders came out from the health authorities. And so as a result of all of that, we managed to flatten the curve. But then in the summertime, we did become somewhat complacent. And we saw that spiking go up again. People became impatient. It's understandable. There was a day in August and we had 500 new cases in a single day. That was August 11th. Now it's starting to level off again. If you're curious, as of today, we've had 31,000 cumulative cases since the pandemic set in Silicon Valley. I'm defining Silicon Valley as the peninsula in the south part of the Bay. So 31,000 cases. We've had, as of today, 475 deaths. Yesterday, there were 2 COVID-related deaths. Of all of our deaths, those 475 deaths, they are mostly people who are above the age of 60. Those deaths, at least here in Silicon Valley where we live, are about a third white and a quarter of them are Hispanic. The rest are other ethnicities. It's starting to come down again, thankfully. Yesterday, there were 53 new cases. I think what we can say most significantly is that here in the Bay Area and in Silicon Valley, our rate of infection per 100,000 people is substantially less than the United States, which, as you know, is continuing to spike. And as a nation now, we have surpassed that 200,000 mark. That's more people than died in all of the wars since World War II. So that's what's happening on the health front. We are not out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination. We have a long way to go in this fight. But now let's talk about the devastating effect that that has had on the economy. When the pandemic set in, we right away lost 200,000 people from our workforce. That was just between March and May. And the unemployment rate spiked up to 11.5%. Remember, before this all began, we were at 3% unemployment in Silicon Valley, which economists consider to be full employment. So that's where we were. It spiked up to 11.6. That's against the backdrop of a nation that was even higher than that. By June, we had 41,000 jobs. By July, we had picked up another 11,000. In August, we picked up another 23,000. And so the economy has been recovering, and that's really good news. We've got 75,000 of our people back to work. And today, as of this morning, our unemployment rate is 7.5%. So let me put that in context. California is much higher, 11%. The nation is at about 8.5%. And so Silicon Valley is faring reasonably well. Now, you might be curious to know that the lowest unemployment rates are Palo Alto, Lark, Mountain View, Sunnyvale, Cupertino. The highest unemployment rates are in South San Francisco. So that's where we are. But let's remember that on net, we still have about 110,000 people in Silicon Valley who are out of work, and they are in the service sector. And so we'll say something about that in a moment. Now comes the question, why is it that Silicon Valley is doing comparatively better than the state and the nation? It's really because of our tech sector. It's really that simple. Our technology companies are strong, and in many cases, they are actually thriving. I think it's quite interesting to point out that this crisis has actually shown the centrality and the importance of the tech sector, and therefore Silicon Valley, for our economy and for our society. You know, before the pandemic set in, the national dialogue was featuring all sorts of techlash. You know, this negative reaction to the tech sector and all of the trends that were happening right here in Silicon Valley. We could talk about that at length if you want to go that direction in our conversation time. I'll just observe. This is interesting to me, that there hasn't been much talk of techlash since the onset of the pandemic. And that is probably because our tech company is what's really propping up the whole thing and making everything possible. I mean, if you think about it, right now we are talking on Zoom, which is a Silicon Valley company. We're in our daily lives relying on Slack and LinkedIn and Google Hangouts and Microsoft Teams. In our social lives, it's Facebook and it's Instagram that are keeping us connected. In our daily lives, it's Instacart, it's DoorDash, it's Uber Eats that are bringing deliveries right to our door and making it possible, therefore, for us to continue isolating. We would probably be losing our marbles if we didn't have Netflix or YouTube. And let me just also point out that the devices that we are using for these amazing services are provided by Apple and Samsung and Google and other Silicon Valley companies. And so the crisis has really shown the centrality and the dependency that we have as a nation, even as the world has, on what is happening right here in Silicon Valley. It's as if we were poised for this thing. The technologies, all of the underlying infrastructure and architecture and supporting systems were invented just in time for this pandemic and its sheltering order. But let me also be very clear that the fight for the vaccine is also being led from Silicon Valley. You have Stanford and UCSF, and you have Gladstone Institutes. These are on the forefront of the testing technologies. You've got an army of small startups and younger companies. companies like 23andMe and others that are very much in the hunt. You have Gilead Sciences, you have Genentech. These are companies that are deep into their clinical trials. You've got Google and Alphabet's artificial intelligence unit. It is focusing on vaccines. The Verily Life Science arm is addressing virus and its detection. You've got Intel working with companies like Lenovo and BGI so that they can speed up the genomic sequencing that happens through supercomputing. And then you've got historic collaborations between companies like Apple and Google. They're teaming up on smartphone technology so that we can enable global contact tracing. So no surprise, our tech sector, despite the pandemic, is actually very much in place, continuing to fire on most of its cylinders, continuing to hire. In many cases, our tech companies are actually thriving and profiting from the pandemic. Just an example, Netflix stock has soared 50% since the pandemic set in. They earned 720 million last quarter. They picked up 8.5 million new subscribers in the last quarter. They had 20 million new subscribers in the first 6 months of 2020. That's more than double their number of subscribers from last year. And that's just one example. Amazon's stock prices have gone up. The S&P 500, which is all the large corporate stocks that are dominated by technology companies, well, it's recovered most of its lost value. And of course, all of our most highly paid professionals have kept their jobs and they've experienced minimal changes in their wealth. So that's what's happening with Silicon Valley. However, the pandemic has exacerbated the gap between those who are thriving and surviving in this economy and those who are suffering and actually not surviving. Now, before the pandemic set in, we had already been lamenting the fact that there were stark gaps. Income inequality was characterized our region. And it's easy to understand this because that's been happening for a long time. What is so striking is that the pandemic exacerbated these trends and made them starkly dramatic. This is perfectly clear. It's all intuitive. Our thriving professionals, the tech elite coming out of the tech sector, they've been making these income gains for decades. Typically, they are members of married, highly educated couples. They live in internet-ready houses that easily accommodate telecommuting, working from home, remote learning. They have multiple bedrooms so that their children can isolate and be plugged into their school learning. And then even during the crisis, they have all the necessities being delivered right to their front door. So that's how one half of our population is living. The service sector doesn't have those same cushions. They're bearing all of the job losses. They're carrying all of those family burdens. These are most likely to be single parent families, single income families, juggling multiple jobs, the first to be laid off, no multiple bedrooms in their houses. The children are not keeping pace with education. They might even lack internet, broadband connectivity. They probably don't have constant parental supervision as they are involved in remote learning. And so the gap has increased. It's been stark. We used to lament that there was a gap, but what we were lamenting is that there were some people that were thriving and some people that were struggling. Now the gap is that we have people who are surviving and thriving, and we have people that are actually not making it. They are not surviving, or they are having to leave altogether. So that's all really stark and sobering and concerning about our region. Meanwhile, our housing markets have actually held reasonably stable. Houses have held their value. We measure this across any number of indicators, so that's interesting. It's also interesting to point out that rents are coming down, and they've come down pretty dramatically. In fact, monthly rents in San Francisco dropped by about 17%. They dropped around 10% in San Jose. And so there's that's a countervailing trend, an equalizing effect for people that are in the rental markets. Let me say one last thing as I'm just doing a quick stock taking. When the pandemic set in, that was one thing, and then there came social unrest that was related to race and racism, and it's caused all of us to be introspective about the state of race and racism in our own region here where we live. Silicon Valley is a place where race and racism are less pronounced. I can say that, thankfully. And yet I don't mean to be glib about this subject. It's a very important and a serious subject, and one where we need to be examining ourselves under a microscopic lens. I'll just point out that there are no black women, zero black women, zero, employed at our 10 largest Silicon Valley companies. Blacks are only 3% of the workforce in the largest 75 tech companies in Silicon Valley. In the venture capital community, only 1% of venture funds went to companies that were founded by African Americans. 15% of our black population do not finish high school. 46% of our black households are not self-sufficient when we measure that on the self-sufficiency indexes. 57% of Latino households are not self-sufficient. And then when you look at our when you look at our homeless populations, 60% of that population are black or Latino. So there's a lot of work for us to do here in Silicon Valley, a lot of things that should be deeply troubling to us. Well, let me conclude by just asking a couple of the big questions that people are asking. One is, are we done with a traditional office? Are we done working in offices? Are people just going to work from home forever? And I'll just venture a guess on that. I can't point data or statistics or anything like that, but we're reasonably certain that when all is said and done, the office will come back and people will be very happy to congregate. Human beings like to be together, and it won't come back as it normally was, but we're suspecting that it will come back as a hybrid, that there will be the opportunity for people to dial their mix, and some people will work at home because that suits them, and some people will work at the office because that really suits them better, and yet there will be another set that makes it up. They will work from home 2 or 3 days a week. So we don't think the office is going away. Here's a more prevalent question, and maybe a more pointed one. The question is, will people be leaving the region permanently? And there has been, in fact, an exodus. We can't call it a mass exodus. In fact, I can't quantify it for you. We don't have statistics on this. We're trying to gather them up. But we all know this anecdotally. I know this. All of you have friends who have left the region because it's possible now to keep their job at their tech company, but to live in another place that's less expensive or otherwise advantageous. And so we all know people that have relocated, but they're still working in Silicon Valley. Before the pandemic set in, there was this threat of flight, this notion that people would be leaving because the housing prices were too high. That may or may not have been developing. That's still an open question. What is clear now is that the pandemic has introduced a new opportunity, which is you can actually keep that job that you love, but you can live somewhere else. Now, when everything returns back to normal, the question is, will people therefore stay remote? And will our tech companies allow it? That's a very interesting question. And I suspect that will be the case. And that what we will see as a result will be this distribution of talent across the United States and no longer as concentrated in Silicon Valley. That's a real possibility. And some people are wondering if that means, therefore, the demise of Silicon Valley. And that's possibly that is a possibility. That is in the realm of possibility. There are two ways that we could look at this. One way to look at it is that we'll see this constant stream of flight, and Silicon Valley will just be a different thing. It will become, instead of a physical location on the peninsula of the San Francisco Bay, it will become shorthand for a phenomenon, shorthand for a for an ethic, a culture, and an ethos. And that ethic is being innovative, disruptive, entrepreneurial, doing it using artificial intelligence and software and computing power, but you can do it from any place because you are networked into what we know traditionally as Silicon Valley. And it could be that that is a very savory outcome for our region and for our nation, because we all gain when there is a more equal distribution of talent. And then on the other side of the coin, it could well be that this is the thing that finally relieves the pressure on our housing markets. And finally, the region becomes slightly more or even significantly more affordable, and it gives Silicon Valley that reset that it's been needing for so long. So these are possibilities. I don't have a crystal ball, but it's possible to see that that could become a developing trend, and we do already see early signs of it. Well, let me finally just say that I actually do hope that the crisis becomes a new starting place for our region, that it is at the point of departure for thinking about ourselves differently, reimagining who we are and what we can become, and doing it with a set of values that encapsulates what we care the most about. And it's becoming clear what it is. Shared prosperity, racial harmony, and then a high functioning society that has in place all of the infrastructure that would be required so that people can pursue their families and their professions in this place that we all value so much. So that's my hope, is that the pandemic becomes the launching point, not only for an eventual recovery, but an actual reimagining of what Silicon Valley can actually be. So thank you for inviting me to share these thoughts. Anjali, I guess I'll toss it back to you and then you'll moderate our discussion.
Yes, thank you so much, Russ, for such insightfulness into the Valley. And I would like to open it up to all our attendees today. If you could just raise your hand and I would unmute you so you can ask your question directly of Russ. I'm sure you have some questions that you would like to ask further from him. So if you raise your hand, I will unmute you. And I think I really like your idea, your thought process about how we are going to start a new starting point once we start the recovery from pandemic. Has your team started working on that kind of an index already, or looking at which is the area that you would work on first, or we should all look at first?
We're thinking about this, absolutely. We're trying to understand how we can contribute to a broad regional discussion, how we can facilitate that discussion, convene the region's leaders, and through an imagining process. Now, we just completed the Silicon Valley Recovery Roundtable. This was convened by Mayor Sam Liccardo of San Jose. It brought together 60 people to think about how Silicon Valley can recover quickly. And this is a group that did really good work. My organization is now trying to take it to the next level. We're trying to say, actually, it's not enough just to recover. We don't want to come back to the place that we were. We would rather imagine a world-class region that has addressed all of its shortcomings and that is modeling itself after all of the best practices that we see in other places like Hong Kong and Singapore and some of the great European economies. And if we can bring all of that to our own planning and decision making, if we can take a fresh look at our governance and take a fresh look at how we do tax and revenue collecting in the region, how we can create an economy where it is more widely shared. So that means bringing together people in a new way and making sure that the right people are in that conversation and bringing a level of stature and standing and gravitas. And we're hoping that that joint venture, my organization, can bring that to pass.
Oh, that's exciting to know. I still don't see anyone raising hands, so I guess no one seems to have any questions for you, which is great. But there we have a question. Let me allow you to talk, Marianne. Go ahead.
Hi, Marianne.
Hi. Great ideas. And I know that Joint Venture Silicon Valley has done a lot of work in the community. One of my major concerns for the future of our community is the schools.
Yes.
How the schools are funded, how the schools can address preparing students for the future. What is your group doing in that regard?
Let me first agree with you that our children are our future, just to throw a platitude out there. I don't know of any society that ever got ahead by disinvesting in education. And so it's perfectly clear that we need to be doing this. And you'll find our group supporting that cause in any way that we can. At the moment, we are not leading any new initiatives in that area. And so we'll take that as your suggestion. There are a host of other organizations, thoughtful people that are thinking about our education conundrum in Silicon Valley. And so we want to be empowering them and enabling them, supporting them. We want to be their cheerleader. When it comes to the big, broad structural questions about, are we investing enough? Are they the right investment mechanisms? That's where we are most interested to weigh in. Thank you, Marianne.
Thank you. And next question is by Dennis.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Dennis.
Thanks. Hey, Russ. Thanks for all the great work that you do in the community and your team does. Just wondering your thoughts on transportation. I'm certainly delighted not to have 2 hours of commuting every day from San Jose to Los Altos Hills and Foothill College, which, believe it or not, is an hour drive one way. But I'm thinking about, how do we, this is certainly the right time to think about how we invest in infrastructure. But then again, how does an entity, a state, a county invest in infrastructure when tax rolls are, down or talent is leaving and can't necessarily be there to build the things we need built, or we have such a demand on our folks who are building things that we can't get everything done. I'm just wondering, I don't have a question. I'm not sure how to form this into a question.
Yep.
Russ, I would love your thoughts.
I'm hearing you, Dennis. And first of all, it's great to see you. I'm glad to hear your voice, Dennis. Dennis is a great citizen of our region, and think about transportation. Now, Dennis probably knows this about me already, but I'm crazy. I'm one of the transportation crazy people. I'm really crazy because I think our transportation network and our infrastructure actually does not serve us. I think it's broken, and I think it needs a big fix, a really dramatic. And that fix isn't possible without just starting over again. That means doing everything fundamentally different. Now, most people laugh me out of the room when I talk this way because it's crazy. I grant you that. It sounds crazy on the face of it. But what's interesting to me is that I think the pandemic and the crisis has given us leave now to think about this differently, to say, wait a minute. Maybe this is an opportunity for a fresh start, to think differently about how we provide our transportation infrastructure and to ask some basic questions. One basic question is, does it make sense for our region to be operating with 29 different transit operators, all of whom view each other as competitors or enemies, all of whom are competing for that same scarce pot of funds? That's one really important question. Another really important question is this the best way to fund a transportation network, a transportation system? Let me just quickly remind you how we fund our transportation system. One way we fund it is through the gasoline taxes, which go to the nation and to the state and then filter back to our region through this crazy quilt of labyrinthian patchwork. It's just, it's crazy. So there's that part. And then we fund our transportation system through sales taxes, also crazy. So when you buy a candy bar at the store, you're also funding in part our transportation system. There are much better ways to fund transportation systems. And this is something that should be squarely on the table. We should think about this. One of the ways is to treat our transportation system like a utility, and to simply have people pay for it on the basis of their use. And this is all possible. I could talk about this at some length. I don't want to bore all of our listeners, but we could do this in a different way that could set the appropriate amounts for our transportation. A third fundamental question that we should put on the table is if we have the proper governance for all of this. I'm not sure we're well served by having 28 different transit agencies all doing their own thing. What if we created actually a Bay Area Transportation Authority, and all of that transportation planning was now rationally funded and rationally planned? We could simply lay it all out. There would be a transportation czar for our region. These people would be, of course, elected, so they would be subject to the democratic dynamic, which is, of course, essential. But we could rationalize all of this and make all kinds of things possible, including making the transit available free of charge. We could do that if we set our minds to it. All of these things are possible, but like I say, it means there can't be any sacred cows. We have to lay everything on the table and be willing to start again fresh. My organization is willing to do that. We're willing to say, let's put all of our region's most distinguished thinkers, planners, office holders in one place, and let's come up with a new compact. Let's look at how they do it in Singapore. Let's look at how they do it in Hong Kong. Let's model those very best practices, create the institutions of governance that are required, fund it in a way that's rational, and then boom, you would have it. It would take time, but more importantly, it would take courage and it would take vision. Dennis, by now, are you regretting ever asking me this question?
Well, I think I'm just going to buy a bike or something and just call it a day.
Let's do that, shall we? By the way, we should be the biking capital of the world. Let me just say that. Silicon Valley has a Mediterranean climate. We have a flat landscape, and we have this health-conscious population. We also have a population that is deeply committed to environment and combating climate change. And yet, we're not the biking capital of the world. Do you know what it is? It's Amsterdam. It's Denmark. And these are cold places that have people using the bike as their primary mode of transportation, even in the rain. So this is something that we could also fix. But here again, I have to point out that it's a failure of imagination and it's a failure of our policy. We have not invested in the seamless kind of bike infrastructure that we need as a region. We can fix this if we get serious.
We have another question. It says, hopefully Dennis got his answer. And the following question is that, do you think that joint ventures will be able to get the index done by February like you have done all these years in past with so many things changing?
You can count on the index. It will be there like clock. February, as we always do. It will have hundreds of indicators. But by the way, you don't have to wait till February. You can go to the website at any time, and there are dynamic indicators there that you can track right now. You can do this right now. It's called SiliconValleyIndicators.org. This is a website that we present to the community to be a community resource. It's there completely free of charge. And we are constantly updating the indicators there, including one dashboard that has everything in real time. Live updates on COVID, on unemployment, on air quality, and all of the rest. So that website is SiliconValleyIndicators.org. Now, Anjali, let me also put in a plug, a shameless plug, for the conference. Every year we release the index at the State of the Valley Conference. We hope all of you will come. It's a wonderful gathering. This year, that is going to have to become an online event. It won't be possible by February to gather in a room like we ordinarily would. We lament that. But we are making the conference an online event. And because of that, it is now possible for us to do far more than was possible in a fixed amount of time and in a fixed landscape. because now we can invite people from all over the nation, the world, thought leaders, opinion makers, wherever they may be, they will participate with us. So we're actually expanding the format of the conference. It will be a 3-day conference, and there will just be a whole menu of offerings over those 3 days. It'll be like 2 or 3 hours per day, and there will be plenary sessions, and then there will also be concurrent sessions and a menu of things that you can just choose and log into, whatever is of interest to you. But over those 3 days, we will be thorough and systematic and comprehensive. We're going to give Silicon Valley a complete workup. Then the conference will also be fun. There will be lots of opportunities for dialogue, discussion, socializing, network, breakout rooms, all of those things. So look for us next February.
We will. Thank you so much, Russ, again, for being with us this afternoon. And we are so very happy that you were able to join the Cupertino Chamber LAC meeting for this month. And
Well,
hope to see you around.
It's been a pleasure and also an honor. Thank you for the invitation. Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye. And now I would like to introduce Angela Sui, our Economic Development Manager, and she is going to give us an update for the city.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Anjali. And, thanks to Russ for giving us the updates about the region and for his stewardship. So Russ talked a little bit more, kind of the regional overview. I'll focus in more locally. I will start off with our development matrix. And let me just pull that up here. So, typically, as you see, things in gray have kind of the most recent activity. And so that was, the first one is Westport Cupertino. City Council approved that on August 18th with updated application materials. If you want to stay updated as to what is going on with that application or the progress of that project, we do have a webpage dedicated to it, and it's cupertino.org/Westport. You can see that. And then next, the short-term rental ordinance. And again, the most recent activity on that was the second reading held on September 15th, which allowed for the city to regulate and to collect fees on short-term rentals. The next is the Bate Brothers site, and an application has come in for a 9-unit townhome development, and that application's under review. Then the bird safe and dark sky ordinances, they had public, planning commission hearings in August, and those are moving forward. And then with the general plan amendment, there was a study session held in July. And so those are the most recent activities and updates. And then other things going on in and around the city. COVID testing is going to be happening regularly in Cupertino at the Senior Center. It's open to everyone, all ages. And in conjunction with the county, we are hosting on the first and third Wednesday of each month, typically from 9:30 to, I believe, 4 o'clock. And you can either go online to register for a specific appointment time. However, specific appointment times are not necessary. You can go in for walk-in. Also, we've been working with the county's business engagement team. So this team was created to help educate businesses as well as, just share information. And ultimately, the other arm of that engagement team would be the compliance arm for the mask ordinance. So businesses are required to have their workers wear masks. And again, it's just for the safety of the community. Also, just updates on what the county is allowing under the red tier or second tier blueprint. So personal services are allowed indoors. Gyms only at a 10% capacity indoors. Everything else has to be outdoors. And dining can only be outdoors in Santa Clara County at this point. But for the city, we are providing temporary outdoor dining permits to restaurants, as well as outdoor operating permits for retailers and personal services if they wish to do their services and provide services outdoors. And those permits are free of charge. And one last thing, we do have free and downloadable posters and sign templates for businesses. So if you go onto the city's website under the business section, it's free posters and marketing material templates. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, do raise your hand if you have a question for Angela, and I can unmute you. Don't see any so far, but Angela, thank you so much for coming to our meetings every month and giving us a city update, because I think that's really important for the business community to hear directly from you. And we work so well in collaboration with the city and the chamber that it's good to see you at least once a month.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
I still don't see anyone raise their hands, so I guess we are good on that piece. So just to wrap up the meeting, I would like to just remind everyone that we have our forum coming up for the candidates next week on Friday at 3 p.m. So hopefully you can go to our website and register for it, and we would like to see as many people there as possible. Please send in your questions either through the registration, or you can send it in to the chamber email address, which is contact@cupertino-chamber.org. And that's the big event happening next week. And then in 2 weeks, we are having a joint mixer with various chambers in the county. And it's the Halloween mixer. So hopefully you all can visit our website and sign up for that. And it would be a fun event because we have like 7 chambers, local chambers are going to get together virtually and have a Halloween themed mixer. With that, if anyone has any questions or remarks they would like to make, please raise your hand and I can unmute you. Or I would say have a wonderful and safe weekend and hope to see you at the next chamber event. Goodbye for now.